Hello, I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Kateryna Smagliy with the Wilson Center. Hello, doctor. Welcome back to UATV.
Hello, Alex. Pleasure meeting you again.
We are here at the Kiev Security Forum 2017, and there was a panel discussion this morning with the current U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, as well as a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And it was a lively discussion about U.S. policy, what's happening on Capitol Hill with regard to Ukraine. What were some of the major takeaways from that panel discussion that you heard?
Yes, the panel discussion was an off-site event. It was not the event organized within the framework of the 10th Kiev Security Forum, but it was indeed a very interesting discussion because both Ambassador Yovanovitch and former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Stephen Piper, who is now a senior expert at the Brookings Institution, they shared with various experts and journalists who gathered in their room what are the most recent developments of the new Trump administration and what its attitude is towards Ukraine. We all know that it is the very first 100 days, even less than 100 days of the new administration, and many political parties and civil society groups are indeed very concerned that the new administration may alter its policy towards Ukraine. However, both Ambassador Yovanovitch and Ambassador Piper has tried to convince us that there is no rollback, that the US government remains committed to Ukraine, and that sanctions against Russia will not be lifted, as some people feared before the elections, and that most recently some senior state officials in President Trump's administration, like his Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, members of the National Security Council, has made very strong statements in support of Ukraine, and that the position which is now being taken can be characterized as a typical Republican support of Ukraine in this very critical moment.
Why do you think there was no fundamental shift? Everybody before the election and immediately after the election was afraid that the Trump administration would roll back, would not support Ukraine, but that didn't happen. Why don't you think that happened?
Probably there are two reasons. First reason is that the Trump administration has, of course, brought a lot of new policy analysts. However, the core of the State Department, the core of the National Security and Defense, the staff of the National Security and Defense Council, the Secretary of Defense's office is made of officials and analysts and experts who've been working on Ukraine for maybe the last 25 years. And of course, as those experts who have been monitoring Ukraine for such a long period of time, they can indeed provide recommendations which should be taken into account whoever comes next to the administration. The second reason is, of course, all those investigations on the Hill and the hearings in the Congress about possible involvement of the Russian side into President Trump's election campaign and his victory. This, as Ambassador Piper said, creates a lot of smoke. We don't know whether there is fire behind the smoke, but nevertheless, this diverts President Trump's attention from all the policy recommendations and all the policy promises that he had made when he was still a candidate for president. He cannot fully implement them, probably because this will serve another proof, that maybe he and his advisors had made certain commitments to the Russian side during the presidential elections. That is why it can be argued, that he involuntarily steps back, because there is no other way for him to perform under these critical circumstances.
Do you think if the Trump administration is vindicated and they find out that there was no special relationship with Russia, with the Kremlin, do you think then he would resume and try and create a special relationship with the Kremlin and possibly pull back support from Ukraine?
Well, that is too early. That is too early to judge, and of course, I'm not that well informed about the inner politics of the White House. Of course, however, we all understand that Russia will continue playing a very important role, and certainly there are people in President Trump's inner circle, who are interested in stabilizing relations with Russia, and this stabilization might not only be in interest of the United States government, but also in the interest of some European leaders. So that is very shaky and unforeseeable situation. We should await for the next NATO summit, which is scheduled for May, and President Trump will make his first public statement at NATO. So some experts expect him to say that the US will stay committed to all the obligations that it has towards NATO, and that President Trump will continue, in fact, some of the policies which had been implemented by his predecessors.
Do you think the New York Times had an article today that said that Trump is finally sinking into the weight of the world is on his shoulders? Do you think that that's true, that what he said about Syria yesterday, about the chemical weapon attack, that he's drew a red line in the sand? Do you think that President Trump now realizes the position he's in, and that he's the President of the United States and the weight of the world is really on his shoulders?
Yes, it is indeed a very big sign, a very strong sign that President Trump has made critical statements about the Assad regime. However, it had been pointed out this morning, he has not yet made any critical statement against President Putin. And as soon as this statement is being done, and we all understand that President Putin in Russia is also to be taking responsibility for all the atrocities which are now taking place in Syria, this would be a more serious step and more serious demonstration of President Trump's commitment to establish law and order and peace, global peace.
I know you spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and even based off of the panel discussion we heard this morning, regarding the will of the U.S. government to keep supporting and keep have the back of Ukraine, how much more reform has to take place in the country with regard to e-declarations, procurement systems? Is that head in the right direction? How much more willpower do you think there is for that?
Well, Ambassador Yovanovitch, U.S. Ambassador Yovanovitch, has reminded us today that Ukraine has made, in the last 3 years, more progress with economic reform, with stabilization of its banking sector, with ensuring more transparency in government procurement system than it has done in the last 25 years. And we shouldn't forget this. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and Ukraine simply shouldn't lose the momentum. We should keep going forward. Of course, some reforms are not as fast and not as deep as we would wish them to be. However, we should acknowledge that some progress is being made. The most important, of course, commitment that Ukraine should fully deliver on is a commitment to electronic declaration, investigation of some illegal acquisition of wealth and power and money, which those declarations have demonstrated. The very dangerous and very bad sign which we observe in the last few weeks is the adoption and signing by the president of the new law, which obligates civil society activists and civil society groups which work in the area of anti-corruption and monitoring of corrupt deeds committed by members of parliament to declare their revenues and to fill those electronic declarations themselves. U.S. Ambassador Yovanovitch has said that the U.S. government is concerned by this step by the president, that they share some of the criticism which had been voiced by civil society groups, and this is indeed a very unfair step taken by the government, which can be seen critically by many international actors. I hope that the president and the parliament will take necessary steps to revoke this decision, because it clearly can be seen as a sign of revenge against civil society organizations which serve as watchdogs on government's actions.
Wasn't one of the reasons that the president did sign it was because in the same bill, it would servicemen, draft soldiers, would not have to declare their income? Was that one of the reasons?
You can provide a lot of reasons why one paragraph was in that law and why another one has not been taken out of the law. Clearly, the president knew what kind of law had been adopted and what kind of law he has signed. He could initiate another working group. He could not even sign that law and send it for additional consultations back to the Rada. The fact that it hasn't been done, that the law has been signed, is a clear demonstration that the president and the people around him, want this bill to be adopted, and that they want to witch hunt civil society groups, which for the last 3 years had been keeping a very close eye on everything that had been done by this and previous cabinets.
So with the bill, NGOs, watchdog groups, even I know journalists, some senior journalists,
they will be affected as well, because if journalists monitor corruption, and if those journalists work in projects which are funded by the European Union or the US government as well, they will have to submit those declarations as well. It is a very unfair situation because, as we understand, the major reason why the electronic declarations had been adopted in the first place is to put officials who receive or who have access to public funds to demonstrate how this public funds being used and whether or not they have additional sources of revenues. So now, instead of doing exactly that and demonstrating transparency and accountability to society, they go after civil society organizations which had been fighting for democracy, for modernity, for transparency for the last 10 years. This is a very bad situation for Ukraine.
How does this get resolved? What has to happen in order for this bill, this law, to be repealed?
Well, some of parliamentary groups or individual deputies have to submit the law that will either revoke this bill, the previous bill, or to submit a new legislative proposal that will deem the previously adopted bill illegal or to annul these bills. And
that brings me to a question I really want to ask you, because during our last conversation a few months ago, you said that the Maidan revolution, the Ukrainian people, they learned their lesson from the Orange Revolution, and this revolution is different. I'm sure you still believe that, and a lot of people believe it. I believe it, but how are they different? How is it different? The Orange Revolution from what we saw in Maidan and the will of the people to carry out the reforms.
As I told you last time, immediately after the Orange Revolution, we haven't seen such a tremendous growth in the number of civil society groups and in the number of voluntary movements. Immediately after Euromaidan, and especially with the war in the east of Ukraine, with the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine's needs in social, in defense, in cultural sector has increased dramatically. And it is indeed a very positive sign that so many ordinary people, they simply started volunteering their time, volunteering their effort, even their personal savings, donating those personal savings to support government in various ways. So on the one hand, we see this tremendous potential and tremendous growth of grassroots initiatives from the ordinary people. On the other hand, we see institutionalization of professional civil society organizations, of non-profit groups, which became much more stronger and much more stronger managerially, professionally, in the areas of advocacy, etc. I believe that the unity among the civil society groups is now a critical factor, especially even in the situation which we just discussed. They have to stay united and they have to fight and speak with the same voice. Their unity would be critical to ensure that they stand strong and can defend civil society ideals vis-a-vis the government. I know that there are attempts to divide. The famous saying is, please divide and rule. That's exactly what some of the people among the President Poroshenko are trying to do. They try to divide civil society groups and by this way to make them weaker. So they have to unite and they have to defend their rights and not go one after another. This infighting would only go will make the situation worse.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smagliy, for joining us today.
Thank you. I think it was a great pleasure to discuss the Kyiv Security Forum with you.
You're one of our more popular guests. I hope you come back soon.
Thank you.
I'm Alex Gupta with UATV.